Hi there, I'm Claire McDonnell Liu, and this is the Family Health Lab. In today's conversation, I'm talking big, fat health lies with Nina Teicholz. Nina is an investigative journalist, author, and founder of the Nutrition Coalition. She is the person who has done the most to blow up the biggest dietary lies of our times. Her New York Times bestseller, The Big Fat Surprise, shattered nutrition wisdom around low-fat diet, cholesterol, red meat and seed oils.
You're listening to the Family Health Lab. Healthy parents, healthy kids.
Welcome to part 1 of 2 of my chat with Nina. Morning. Hello, Nina. Thank you for popping on to talk to me about nutrition and fats and what you're working on.
Hello, Claire. It's so good to see you. Nice to be here.
How was the morning there? What have you been up to? Anything? Have you walked the dog so far?
Actually, I have. It's a summer morning in New York City, and I have been out and walking the dog early this morning, got my child off to school, so this is now mid-morning for me. What about you?
Well, it's been a day off school for the children, so I've been kind of doing a bit of a juggle. But I managed to get to the beach. I'm trying to go in still every day for a dip, and we live 5 minutes from the sea, which is really lovely in the bay. And today it was due to rain all day, and it didn't. It was just gorgeous. So had a really nice day, actually.
New York City is almost like living on a beach, really. In a little town far off on the the west coast of Australia where you are?
Yes. We're living in absolute bliss. Really, really beautiful. We're just a little cut off from other parts of the world. That's the only downside. You've got the opposite. I was reading an article today, and I posted it on LinkedIn. Belinda Fettke's also posted it as well. And it's a World Health Organization have done a ranking of the most of nations by how overweight the children are. And Australia's now the second is second for the most overweight under 5s in the world. I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't, but I know that Australia's obesity problem is right on par with the United States, I would assume. What was the number one country? The United States?
No, it's not one that I would have guessed, and I have to read the report in detail, so I've only read the headlines. But Libya, I wouldn't have guessed it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Me neither.
Yeah.
I might have guessed Mexico, or I think Greece is the fattest country in Europe. But anyway, those kinds of data are maybe not so reliable. That's sort of a low quality of data, country data, because different countries are doing worse or better job of collecting the data. I think probably numbers in obesity are standardized, but still there's just a wide variation how well that data is collected and assessed.
We think when the headlines involve children of that age, under 5s, it's just another reminder of how far we've all let this go and how complacent we've become about what's led us here. And that that kind of leads me on to what you're working on currently. I wanted to ask you about your sugar in school meals campaign, and if you could talk us through that would be great.
Absolutely. And I just want to say one comment on obesity is that if you look at the news over the past, say, decade, obesity has been almost not in the headlines at all. There really is very little commentary on obesity and diabetes, and considering that they affect, between obesity and diabetes, 2/3 of probably at least the U.S. population, and probably Australia is right up there as well. And there has been almost no really serious reckoning with that by the media until what happened in the past year has been the introduction of these GLP-1 inhibitors, these weight loss drugs, which are injectables in the United States. They're $12,000, $13,000 a year. They're probably for life because you regain after you go off them. And all of a sudden we see now, with the entrance of large pharmaceutical companies and their products, we see obesity in the headlines all the time, right? So suddenly now we have a conversation about it because there is a pharmacological solution. And that tells you something about sort of the state of our media, for one. I mean, what is driving our media and what drives, the placement of stories, the kinds of conversations that are in the media. but also, the complacency of public health officials to really not grapple with one of the greatest probably public health crisis that exists, maybe outside of COVID over the past couple of years. But obesity-related diseases, or I should say insulin resistance-related diseases, are the number one killers. They've killed, in the U.S., they kill every year more people than died of COVID or who are identified as dying from COVID. So it really is just an extraordinary fact about our life that we have raging debates in the headlines about all kinds of things, but not about the health issues that are really afflicting the vast majority of our populations. So that's just sort of a comment on how difficult it is to talk about these things or to get them into the public. And I can segue from that into talking about children in schools and what they're being fed. In America, we have government-funded school lunch program and also a school breakfast program, which typically feature things like orange juice and Danish or donuts for breakfast, followed by maybe there's some kind of small protein like a deep fried chicken McNuggets that come with only non-fat or 1% skim milk. So there's no regular milk, no whole milk. And, altogether, these meals are supposed to follow our national dietary guidelines, which have a 10% cap of calories on sugar. But there is no cap on the amount of sugar in school meals. So the measurements are between the breakfast and the lunch, those meals can be like 70, they can have easily like upwards of 20-25% of their calories as sugar in them, which is just appalling what we're feeding our kids in schools. So the Nutrition Coalition, which is a group that I founded, it's a nonprofit aimed at trying to improve nutrition policy and nutrition programs to better reflect the evidence, that the science that's out there. Part of what the science says is that sugar is bad for health. It's not just benign calories. Sugar's actively harming people. And so we started a campaign to try to calling for just merely to cap the sugar in school meals to what our national policy says. So that's 10% of calories. I want to say that in the United States, there's a tremendous movement now to pay attention to better nutrition, but it is not focused on sugar. It's mainly focused on getting more fruits and vegetables to people. It's called the Food is Medicine movement. And it's been quite influential over the past year. The Biden White House has been involved, the USDA has been involved, various government agencies, but they're almost exclusively focused on providing more fruits and vegetables, and they're not paying attention to grains or sugars. In fact, our government agency in charge of school meals, the USDA, said, well, we'll try to reduce sugar starting in 2027. We'll start to reduce sugar. Which I think is, if you know something's a problem now, what could possibly be the reason for delay?
An enormous problem now with the amount of sugar as you've said, how much sugar is coming to children through USDA meals and their breakfast program meals, their breakfast lunch meals. They're excessively high in sugar. And, I can't understand why wait. All I've read about why they would wait for that length of time was that it's too complicated, and the food manufacturers and the service providers need more time, years and years, to reduce the sugar for children. So children are going to spend the next X amount of years being loaded and causing harm. And I think, just going back to that comment that you made about the press and the media is quite quiet about this, the articles that I was reading, the World Health Organization report on obesity in the and overweight under 5, it was interesting. They talked about ranking and they went into detail, and I read it in different publications. And I think, just really aware that nobody mentioned the health implications that you just mentioned, that this is a killer, that this will lead to severe harm for these children as they're growing. If they're beginning overweight, they're more likely to be overweight or even obese adults, and we know that that's linked to risk, so many different kind of elevated risk factors for them. But it wasn't mentioned. It's just so telling when the press is just so quiet about what damage that does to them. So yes, so you're one of the only organisations, I believe, calling this sugar to be reduced for children quicker and by more.
We're the only organization in the United States. Yes. I mean, you have the Public Health Collaboration in the UK doing something similar to our work, but there's no other organization in the United States calling for reductions in sugar, which is extraordinary. And one insight into that is to look at our government agency that is in charge of our dietary guidelines, which is something that Nutrition Coalition has done. We supported a paper, the first ever real systematic review of all the conflicts of interest on the expert committee that oversees the science for the dietary guidelines, and found that 95% of them had a tie to either a food or pharmaceutical company. And more than half of the committee, a 20-person committee, had 30 such ties or more. One woman had 152 ties. So, and the one person who didn't have a tie to food or pharma was and many of the committee members had millions and millions of dollars in government grants from the same agencies that are overseeing the guidelines, which is a different kind of conflict of interest, but perhaps equally powerful, which is that you really don't want to be confronting and challenging the very agency that funds all of your work. And we also found that the office inside this government agency in charge of the guidelines has a partnership program with maybe 100 different, up to 100 different food companies, where they're engaged in a partnership to help promote the guidelines, to be involved in promoting the government policy. So, I think we can say from these just two data points that there is, there's a tremendous amount of food industry, influence in a government agency that is supposed to be trying to safeguard the public health. But that's really never been their, the USDA has always been about promoting American food products. And it really is not part of the mission of that agency to protect the public health, which is a pretty striking fact.
And most people, I think, most members of the public would be, if they go to their doctor or they send their child to daycare or to school, they would be trusting in some government agency to have thought through the food and made sure that it's suitable, that it's healthy, that it's not causing harm. But what you've found, this research has taken years, and no other organisation has delved into this and published this. But you found that the very people who have been paid to review all of the science and make sure that food guidelines are correct and safe for the public, they are actually taking money from pharmaceutical companies and food companies. They are involved with them. They are talking with them. They're going to their conferences. They're doing reports, they're doing works together. But there's financial benefit of them working with those organisations. So they really then not necessarily trustworthy sources of information, because they're in partnership with these agencies, organisations, these businesses that don't want to change the guidelines and want their food products to be approved and endorsed, and they want their grain products to be sold to the public as healthy.
Right, and you can see that in the results of the guidelines themselves, the dietary guidelines, what is recommended to the public. So I don't know exactly your guidelines in Australia, but I imagine they're fairly similar. The U.S. guidelines recommend 6 servings a day of grains, including 3 servings of refined grains, which is truly indefensible, and 10% of calories of sugar, as I mentioned, and 5.5 teaspoons of vegetable oils. So, and no natural fats, and they do not actively recommend regular meat, eggs, or regular dairy. They are they do not actively recommend the healthiest and most complete proteins available for human health and survival. So you can see in the output that there has to have been food industry influence, because those are not guidelines that are conducive to human health.
And it's crazy. I believe that it's crazy that these conflicts of interest, that you have funded that research and undertook that research and put that out there in the public domain. But otherwise, that would be unknown. No, we would not be aware. There's no transparency, I believe, with the guidelines. One of the key differences is the Australian guidelines are under review at the moment. We're in a 4-year process that's being extended. They do declare in conflicts of interest, and none were declared, and the only ones that were found, again, Belinda Fettke had a good look in detail at this and found that I think it was 90% of the committee, both committees, overseeing committees, are involved with the agency who is undertaking the review. But not so much, not the same situation as in America, where you have such extensive financial ties to pharmaceutical companies and food companies. But Nina, you have just put out a statement. You're the founder of the Nutrition Coalition, the body that you're undertaking this research and putting this information out with. It's a non-profit organisation, and you've put a statement out regarding the American Dietary Guidelines, stating that you support a call for them to be suspended. That seems quite a bold statement, unprecedented. So what's happening there?
We put out a press release about the fact that Senator Chuck Grassley, who is a member of the U.S. Congress, who has historically been quite interested in conflict of interest issues, he called, much more significant than our calling for this, he called for the suspension of the dietary guidelines until all the conflicts of interest are fully disclosed by the USDA, that government agency that oversees them. So this, I believe, is the direct result of the work that we did, the paper that I told you about that came out with a 95% number that looked at the last dietary guidelines expert committee. So that was for the last cycle of the guidelines. Now we're in a new cycle, and this is quite astonishing what USDA did. They said, oh, okay, we will release their conflicts of interest for the first time in the 40-plus year history of the guidelines, but they released it in a document that I have actually never seen conflicts of interest released this way in the thousands of papers that I've read. They listed all the companies and conflicts all together. So for the 20-person committee, they just list them all. They do not connect them to the individual committee members, so that all the conflicts are anonymized effectively. The whole point of a conflict of interest statement is to see how a particular person might be influenced. Impossible to do that with that document. We sought and got comment from Gordon Guyatt, one of the most famous, most cited evidence-based medicine experts in the world, who is at McMaster's University, saying that if the Dietary Guideline Expert Committee wants to hide their conflicts of interest, seems like they're doing a good job of it. So we have been really the only group promoting this problem. Senator Chuck Grassley is interested, and he is the one who issued a call to USDA asking them for proper disclosure by name, listing conflicts by name of each member of the committee. And now USDA has until June 8th to respond to that. So it is unprecedented. And I think our organization really, is due to our work since 2015 that there is any awareness that there's really a problem with the dietary guidelines. I mean, the kind of article, we've had articles in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and various publications that have, I think we have brought to light the fact that we have a problematic guidelines that is not serving the public health, that the traditional defense, people just don't follow the guidelines and they don't know what they are. We've been able to show the facts that is, that's indeed not true. People in general have really followed the guidelines in the U.S., and I'm sure it's the same in Australia. Meat consumption's declined, whole milk has declined, animal fats have declined, grains, fruits, vegetables have all increased in consumption since 1970. So we've really been able to bring that to light, and we have had some really significant wins. So this latest one by Chuck Grassley is exciting. I don't know what will happen to it, but stay tuned.
So good for this type of exposure.
There is a National Academy of Sciences, which is the top scientific body in our country. There's a report by that group that was mandated and funded by Congress, also from the work that we've done. But that report strongly recommends that these conflicts of interest be publicly disclosed.
That's what I read. So
committee members, when they're selected, they have to submit a form with their conflicts to USDA, but that is not required to be publicly disclosed. So it's only due to this National Academy of Sciences report that now there's sort of the backing to say, well, we should have public disclosure of these. And that's standard for any guideline process. It's standard for any scientific paper now. There's been a move towards increased transparency, and that should be the standard that USDA is held to, especially for such important guidelines that are so powerful and affect so many people. They're followed by all doctors and dietitians and nurses and nutritionists, and they're followed in nursing homes and at schools, as we've said, and by military in their mess halls. So, they're just so influential. We should know the influences, including corporate influences, that are having an impact on them.
Absolutely. And public have a right to know about this. And ideally, the more awareness, the more people understand, the better decisions they can make. On a little bit of a side note, I did read a report a few years ago about studying groups, research on adolescents, and the more they were made aware of how they were being targeted in the media with fast food and junk food advertising on screens and on the way to school and on their devices now, and their favorite TV shows, and the coloring, the branding, the logos, and the types of information. So the more aware they became, groups, the more better choices they made, the more savvy. And I guess I believe that's the same with the members of the public, as we've mentioned. If this information isn't in the public domain and the media aren't reporting on that, then no wonder there's such a blanket silence and a disconnect with our food decisions as families, busy families getting on with things. But just so I'm excited to watch how that goes and see. And I very much believe that's influenced by your work over many years and the organisation's work, and you're really active in this area. But also, America leads what happens elsewhere. I'm now based in Australia, but I'm very much interested and involved in what happens in the UK, and this what happens with these particular guidelines will have implications globally. But I just on backing up a little bit, I was just wanting to get into how you got into nutrition, because it wasn't particularly what you studied during an investigative journal. That's a big topic. You call it a rabbit hole. So if you wouldn't mind talking through a little bit about your background there.
This is the end of part 1 of my podcast chat with Nina. In the second and final part, Nina shares how she kept going with her nutrition science research despite sinister campaigns against her. She's also refreshingly candid about her own family's eating habits and the surprising foods that you'll find in her kitchen. I hope you'll join us for part 2. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe. This really helps us to be able to create more content.